Have you ever walked into the wrong place and felt like you were meant to be there all along? Tonight's story begins with a single knock, a rain-soaked man and a woman who utters just 6 quiet words that change everything. But don't rush to assumptions. What follows isn't what you think. It's deeper, more human, and it might just stay with you long after the final line. Before we begin, if stories of kindness, quiet love, and second chances speak to your heart, please consider subscribing to the channel. It means the world to us and helps us continue sharing the stories that matter. Now let's begin. The Stranger Upstairs. A poor mechanic stepped into the wrong suite. She pulled him in and said, "I was hoping it was you." The rain hadn't let up in hours. It fell in fine needles that stung Ethan's cheeks as he squinted up at the towering glass and steel behemoth looming above him. Langford Tower, the kind of building that didn't usually show up on his repair route. Most of his gigs were in modest apartment complexes or diners whose plumbing dated back to the 1980s. This place had gold leaf logos etched into the glass lobby doors and a doorman who looked at him like a misplaced package. Ethan stepped inside, wiping his boots on the mat and pulling the crumpled work order from his damp jacket. The paper was smudged ink bleeding around the address. Unit 13B, it had said. Emergency plumbing issue, busted faucet possibly leaking into the unit below. The dispatcher told him to head up right away. No concierge signature needed. The doorman nodded reluctantly after checking a clipboard. 13th floor. Service elevators to the left. Ethan nodded a polite thanks, gripping his tool bag. The elevator was sleek and silent. Inside, a soft tune played something classical he couldn't name, and the numbers lit up in gentle amber as he pressed 13. Or thought he did. His thumb had hit the button marked 31. The elevator ascended with a whisper. When the doors opened, he stepped out into a corridor that felt more like a luxury hotel than any apartment floor he'd seen. Plush carpet, wall sconces that glowed like candlelight. A faint scent of lavender and vanilla hung in the air. "This can't be it," he muttered. Still, he walked to the door labeled 31B. The numbers were carved into a smooth wooden plaque with brushed metal trim. Maybe this was one of those buildings where units were labeled by tower instead of floor. He'd seen weirder. He knocked firm but polite. The door opened almost instantly. And then time stopped. She stood in the doorway barefoot, wearing a silk robe the color of antique ivory, her auburn hair pulled back in a loose, elegant twist. Her eyes, deep green, rimmed with exhaustion, searched his face like she was flipping through memories only she could see. For a full breath, she didn't speak. Then just as Ethan opened his mouth to apologize, "I was hoping it was you," she said softly. Her voice wasn't flirtatious or coy. It was something else entirely, relief. Longing, like someone who'd been waiting by the window for years. Ethan blinked. "I'm sorry, I think I've got the wrong." But she stepped aside. "Come in, please." There was something in her tone that didn't ask it needed. Ethan hesitated, one boot still on the threshold, then nodded slowly and stepped inside. The apartment was warm, low-lit. A record played faint jazz in the background. On the kitchen island sat a half-filled wine glass, a linen napkin, a vase with white lilies just beginning to wilt. It paused like a life mid-sentence. She walked ahead of him, her steps light against the hardwood floors. "You still fix things," Ethan followed slowly. Yes, I'm a mechanic, plumbing too. I was sent to fix a faucet. Thought this was 13B. She turned, smiling faintly, but it didn't quite reach her eyes. "Maybe you're exactly where you were supposed to be." He scratched the back of his neck. "I can check your sink, just in case." "In the kitchen," she said. "Left side's been dripping." He set his bag down and crouched under the sink. Sure enough, a slow leak had created a fine sheen on the pipe beneath. Not enough to cause damage yet, but it would have in a week. As he worked, she poured a second glass of wine and sat on one of the tall bar stools. "I'm Rachel," she said after a while. "Ethan," he replied, tightening a joint. Sorry for the intrusion. I really didn't mean to show up uninvited." She studied him. "You're not intruding. You're unexpected." That word lingered in the air. When he finished, he stood and wiped his hands with a rag. She handed him a clean napkin. It smelled faintly of perfume, something floral but grounded. Jasmine and cedar, maybe. "You're very kind," she said. Most men would have just walked out. He gave her a small shrug. "You looked like you needed someone to stay." Silence settled between them. Not awkward, contemplative. Rachel sipped her wine. "Tonight would have been my father's birthday. Not my biological one, the one who raised me. He died last week. I'm sorry. He was a mechanic, too." She smiled this time with something sad but genuine. "Taught me how to rebuild a carburetor when I was 12. I used to sit in his shop just to hear him hum to the radio. That sounds like a good man. He was, and then he wasn't. And then he tried to be again. I forgave him too late." Ethan didn't know what to say to that. So he didn't. Sometimes silence said more than words. She stood and walked him to the door. "I won't keep you, but thank you for being here tonight." He nodded, not trusting his voice. The weight of the moment, her vulnerability, the strange comfort in this accidental meeting settled over him. As he stepped into the hall, she touched his arm lightly. "If you ever get the wrong address again," she said, voice barely above a whisper, "maybe try this one." Then the door clicked shut behind him. And for a long moment Ethan stood there listening to the echo of her words. Something in his chest stirred a familiar ache he thought he'd buried long ago. Not love, not yet, but the sense that maybe not all wrong doors are wrong. Ethan drove home in silence, windshield wipers beating in steady rhythm against the soft drizzle. The streets were mostly empty, bathed in the blurred glow of yellow street lamps. Yet the silence in his truck felt louder than the rain. He kept replaying her voice. "I was hoping it was you." It hadn't been a flirtation. It hadn't been confusion. It had been honest. Like she'd opened the door expecting a ghost and found a man who looked enough like one to pass. He glanced at the crumpled work order on the passenger seat. 13B. He'd definitely hit the wrong floor. But she hadn't asked him to leave. In fact, she'd looked relieved. He didn't know what to make of that. By the time he pulled into the gravel driveway of the duplex he rented on the east side of the city, the rain had slowed to a mist. Light still glowed behind the blinds of the front room. Lily was waiting. Inside, he found her curled up on the sofa under her fleece blanket, her sketchbook balanced on her knees. A cartoon owl looked up at him from the page, mid-flight wings wide. "Hey, Dad," she said sleepily, not looking up. "Hey, Bug," he replied, towing off his boots and setting his tool bag down softly. Still drawing, she nodded. Couldn't sleep. He sat beside her and took a breath, letting the warmth of the room seep into him. "You eat mac and cheese." She held up her thumb like a seal of approval. It was deluxe. Ethan smiled. The boxed kind with the powdered cheese. Obviously. That made him chuckle. She sounded like her mom when she used that tone, mock serious, full of sass and heart. It struck him hard tonight. For a moment, he just looked at her the way she was biting the eraser and squinting at her drawing. She had her mother's eyes. Hazel, with flecks of gold, always a little too curious for her own good. "I missed you," she said suddenly, setting the sketchbook aside. "I was only gone a couple hours," he replied gently. "I know." Her voice was quiet, but when it gets late and I'm the only one awake, I miss Mom. And you. Ethan reached over and wrapped her in his arms, pressing his cheek to the top of her head. The warmth of her anchored him more than anything else ever had. "I miss her too," he said. "All the time." They sat like that for a while until Lily's breathing slowed into the rhythm of sleep. He carried her to bed and pulled the covers up around her chin. On her nightstand, a small plastic bracelet glowed faintly in the dark, something from the hospital where she'd spent too many nights last winter after the seizures started. Back in the kitchen, Ethan poured himself a cup of lukewarm coffee and leaned on the counter. His mind kept drifting back to Rachel. There was something about her that stayed with him, not just her eyes or her apartment or even the way she spoke. It was the stillness around her, the weight of someone who had everything money could buy but nothing that made her feel safe. He thought of the lilies on her counter just beginning to droop, the untouched dinner plate, the hesitation in her voice when she said she'd forgiven her father too late. He'd seen that look before in the mirror, after his wife passed, and he'd had to learn to smile for Lily's sake even when everything in him felt gray. And then there was that strange, almost impossible coincidence, her father being a mechanic. The way she had lingered when he picked up the wrench like it unlocked a memory. Maybe that was why she let him in. Maybe she'd been waiting for someone who reminded her of the man she once loved and lost. He didn't kid himself, he was just a stand-in for a ghost. Still, there had been something real in the way she handed him that napkin. He took it from his coat pocket now and held it up to the dim light. It was cloth, not paper, embroidered with the letter L. Subtle perfume still clung to it, same scent from her apartment. Jasmine and something earthy like cedarwood. Strange how small things could feel like messages. He folded it carefully and tucked it back into the inner pocket of his coat. The next morning, Ethan dropped Lily off at school. Her teacher, Mrs. Dawson, greeted her with a warm hug. They were lucky to have someone like her, kind, patient, perceptive. As Ethan turned to leave, Mrs. Dawson caught his sleeve. "She's been asking a lot more about her mother lately," she said gently. "Sometimes during story time." Ethan nodded. "She always gets quieter in the fall. Maybe you could talk to the counselor again, just to give her space to share." "I'll think about it," he said. But inside he felt the familiar mix of guilt and helplessness. He wanted to be everything Lily needed, but he also knew he was barely holding things together. 2 jobs' bills, hospital debts. And now a woman he didn't know had said something that wouldn't leave him alone. "I was hoping it was you." That evening, Ethan drove back through the city on another call. This one was real floor 12 busted water heater, routine. But as he passed Langford Tower, he slowed gaze drifting to the familiar glow of the upper floors. Suite 31B. He almost didn't stop, but the light was on again. Not the ceiling lights. A single lamp in the corner, like someone was reading, or waiting. He pulled over and sat there for a long minute, engine idling. Then with a sigh and a slow shake of his head, Ethan drove on. He had no business being there. She was just a woman grieving in silk, and he was just the mechanic who knocked on the wrong door. But deep down he also knew it hadn't been the wrong door at all. Rachel didn't remember falling asleep. One moment she was staring at the ceiling, the dull ache in her chest pulsing like a wound that refused to close. The next morning, light spilled through the sheer curtains of the penthouse windows, painting the hardwood floors in pale gold. Her wine glass from the night before still sat half full on the kitchen island. She hadn't eaten. Again. Rachel pushed herself upright, clutching the edge of the couch for balance. Her robe had slipped from one shoulder during the night, but the chill that slid down her spine had little to do with the room temperature. It had to do with him, with Ethan, with the man who showed up by accident and somehow felt more familiar than any of the people who had come into her life with purpose. She walked to the kitchen, ignoring the pulse of a dull headache, and opened the dishwasher out of habit. It was already empty. The maid had come yesterday morning. There was nothing left for her to do but exist, eat, bathe, smile for shareholders when needed. But none of those were natural anymore. Rachel opened the drawer by the fridge and pulled out her father's old wrench, the one he gave her the summer she turned 13. It had rusted along the edges, the handle worn down by decades of use, but she'd kept it like a relic, a fossil of who she used to be. Her father, David Langford, hadn't always been wealthy. He started with a 2-bay auto shop in Tacoma, worked 6 days a week, and fixed cars with his bare hands until one day he had a chance to buy the building he was renting. That small investment eventually became Langford Services, then Langford Tower. But somewhere along the way he traded his toolbox for balance sheets. He dressed in Italian suits, not oil-stained flannel. He forgot how to get his hands dirty. And she, his only child, grew up in two worlds, one of shop rags and socket wrenches and one of boardrooms and private schools. Rachel held the wrench like it might still remember him the way she did. That's what Ethan reminded her of. Not her father exactly, but the man her father had once been. The man who whistled while working, who smelled of grease and lemon soap, who taught her that if something was broken, you didn't throw it away. You fixed it. She set the wrench gently on the counter, then crossed to the window and looked out over the city. Morning fog clung to the skyline, softening the harsh lines of concrete and glass. Down below, cars streamed like blood cells through veins, everyone rushing busy, connected and disconnected all at once. And somewhere out there, Ethan was beginning his day. He hadn't asked for her name, not until the end. And when he did, he'd said it like it mattered. Not like someone checking off a work order, but someone who saw her, really saw her. Rachel turned from the window and picked up her phone. She didn't text him. She didn't have his number, but she still had the repair slip. She'd found it under the vase of lilies last night after he left a standard-issue carbon copy form. Most of the handwriting was smudged from the rain, but at the bottom, scribbled just above the signature line, was his first name and a barely legible phone number starting with 206. Seattle Local. She stared at the numbers, then tucked the slip into the back of a leather-bound notebook and forced herself to start the day. Meanwhile, across town, Ethan stood in the hallway outside Lily's bedroom listening. He didn't hear anything. No cartoons playing on low volume, no sound of drawers opening or socks being flung in frustration. That was unusual. Lily was always moving, always narrating her actions like a one-girl radio station. He knocked lightly. "Hey, you up?" A pause. Then her small voice, "Kind of." Ethan opened the door. Lily sat on the edge of the bed, still in pajamas, holding a crayon she hadn't used. Her sketch pad lay on the floor. He stepped in. "You feeling okay?" She shrugged, then looked up at him. "I had a dream." He sat beside her. "About Mom? Kind of." She hesitated. She was standing on a ladder hanging stars from the ceiling. "And I asked if I could help, but she said, 'Not yet. You're still building yours.'" Ethan felt something tighten behind his ribs. He placed a hand on her back, gentle. "That's a beautiful bug." Lily looked at him. "Do you think dreams are messages?" "Sometimes," he smiled. "Sometimes they're just our hearts working overtime." "Then mine must be really tired." He kissed the top of her head. "Let's give it a break then." Waffles. Her eyes lit up slightly. "With peanut butter, you drive a hard bargain." Later that morning, as Ethan flipped pancakes in the small kitchen, he noticed the cloth napkin Rachel had given him. It was still in his coat pocket, folded neatly, the L embroidery just barely visible. He thought about her voice, her grief, the tremble in her smile. He thought about her apartment, silent and spotless, like no one had truly lived in it for months. He had felt out of place at first. But then he realized she had too. Maybe that's why she'd let him in. Not because he was supposed to fix something, but because she needed someone who understood what silence really meant. Rachel sat at her desk that same hour, staring at her laptop. The cursor blinked at the top of a blank email. She wasn't sure what she was trying to write. A thank you. An apology. A question. Do you ever walk into a room and feel like you've been there before, just not as the same person? That was what she should have asked him. Instead, she closed the laptop, stood and walked over to her father's old leather armchair. She hadn't sat in it since the funeral. Lowering herself slowly, she curled her legs up and looked out the window once more. Somewhere out there was a man who entered the wrong door, and somehow in doing so had left it open just enough for light to come in again. Ethan wasn't one to linger. His days were built around momentum. Fix, move, provide, repeat. But for the past 3 mornings he found himself driving just a little slower past Langford Tower. He told himself it was coincidence, traffic, habit, but he knew better. Something in that apartment had pulled him in deeper than he cared to admit. And it wasn't the leaky faucet. He didn't expect to see her again. In his world, moments like that, odd, tender, and entirely unearned, usually dissolved without explanation. That's how life went for men like him. You were the background, not the story. So when he pulled into the parking lot of Branson's Auto Supply to grab a part for a service call, he didn't expect anything more than a routine morning. He especially didn't expect to see her. She was standing near the entrance, one hand holding a small bag, the other wrapped tightly around her own wrist. Her hair was tied in a low ponytail, sunglasses perched on her head, and she wore jeans and a soft gray sweater that somehow made her look even more out of place in the grease-slicked parking lot. Rachel. She saw him before he saw her. For a second, she looked like she might step back, disappear. But she didn't. She waited. Ethan slowed, pulling into a spot a few feet away, trying not to look like someone caught in a dream. He got out of the truck. "This isn't your kind of place," he said with a crooked smile. She smiled back almost shyly. "Used to be. A long time ago." He nodded toward the bag in her hand. "Shopping for memories." "Brake fluid," she said, lifting the bag. "My father's '61 Impala's still in storage. Thought I'd try starting it today. You work on it yourself, I did when I was younger. Haven't touched it in 10 years. But today felt right." Ethan rubbed the back of his neck. "Can't lie, I didn't expect to see you here." "Good," Rachel said, "because I came hoping not to feel like a stranger." That stopped him. A breeze picked up, carrying the faint scent of motor oil and spring dust. Ethan gestured toward the small coffee shop across the street. "You hungry?" Rachel tilted her head. "Coffee counts as food. In my line of work, it's a whole food group." They sat by the window in the cafe, 2 mugs between them. Outside, cars passed in a lazy rhythm. Inside, the low hum of a radio played something bluesy old and aching. Rachel wrapped her hands around her mug. "It's strange, isn't it? How we forget that grief has seasons." Ethan raised an eyebrow. "Seasons?" She nodded. "Everyone talks about the first's first birthday after they're gone first holiday. But no one tells you how it sneaks back the 3rd or 4th year, or how some random Tuesday can hit harder than the funeral ever did." He listened. Really listened. Rachel noticed that. He didn't interrupt. He didn't try to fix the silence. He simply let it be. "I thought I was past it," she said. "But then, the night you showed up, it was like something cracked. Not in a bad way, just cracked." "I know what you mean," Ethan said. "Some nights Lily says something, or I hear a song at the grocery store, and suddenly I'm back in the hospital hallway holding a paper cup of coffee and pretending I still had time." Rachel's fingers tightened around her mug. "You don't talk about her much, do you?" she asked. Ethan shook his head. "Not because I don't want to, just I never know if people want to hear about her." "I do." They sat in silence for a moment. Then he said, "Her name was Marissa. She taught 2nd grade. Had a thing for books about lost animals and never left the house without Burt's Bees lip balm. She hated coffee but loved the smell of it, so she'd brew a pot every morning just to fill the apartment with the scent." Rachel smiled softly. "She sounds lovely." She was, and she made me better, still trying to be that version of me. For Lily. A few seconds passed before Rachel whispered, "Do you think that's what grief really is? The version of ourselves we keep chasing after they're gone." Ethan considered that. Maybe. Or maybe it's the reminder we were lucky enough to love someone worth missing. That settled between them like a warm blanket. Back outside, Rachel stood beside his truck, reluctant to leave. "I'm sorry for showing up out of nowhere," she said. "I'm not," he replied. They smiled. As she turned to go, she paused. "Would you? I mean, if you ever have time, my dad's old car is in a garage in Westlake. I could use someone who knows what they're doing." "You trying to bribe me with carburetors?" he teased. "I'm just saying," she said, eyes glinting. "You already fixed one thing I thought couldn't be repaired." Then she walked away. That night, Ethan sat on the couch watching Lily sketch with her usual intensity. She was working on a drawing of a girl standing on a ladder reaching for stars. "What's this one?" he asked gently. "It's Mom," Lily said. "And that's me. I'm trying to help her, but I can't reach yet." Ethan swallowed the lump in his throat. "You will, Bug. You will." Lily looked at him wide-eyed. "Did something good happen today?" "Yeah," he said. "Something small. But good." She nodded, satisfied. Then she reached into her backpack and pulled out a folded piece of paper. "This came today. From the hospital." Ethan unfolded it. A bill. Another reminder that their good days were borrowed on credit. Still, he looked back at Lily, then at the window where the sky had begun to clear. Maybe not all debt was heavy. Some things some people paid you back in ways you never saw coming. And maybe just maybe a woman in a gray sweater with a broken past had walked back into his life to remind him what hope looked like in daylight. The old garage smelled like time, oil and leather, dust and memory. The kind of scent that lived in the walls and didn't apologize for how long it had lingered. Rachel stood just inside the roll-up door, her arms crossed as if to protect herself from something colder than the air. In front of her, shrouded in a gray tarp, rested the '61 Impala her father once called his second heartbeat. She hadn't touched the car since the night he collapsed. Ethan stepped in beside her, wiping his hands on a rag. "You sure you're ready for this?" Rachel hesitated. "No, but I think I'm ready for what it brings back." They pulled the tarp off together, each corner revealing more of the past. The car was in surprisingly good shape, just dusty, a little weary, like it had waited for this reunion. Its once polished black coat was now dulled to charcoal, but the chrome still caught light like it remembered how. "Looks solid," Ethan said, crouching by the front fender. "Tires are flat. Battery's dead. But she wants to live. I can feel it." Rachel smiled faintly. "He used to say that. About everything he fixed. He sounds like someone who believed in second chances." She didn't answer right away. Instead, she opened the driver's door. It creaked, but didn't fight. The scent hit her like a wave tobacco from the glove compartment, vanilla from the air freshener that still dangled as a faded ghost from the rearview mirror. She ran her fingers along the cracked leather of the steering wheel. "I used to sit in that seat after school," she said, pretending I was driving away from everything. "Back when things were hard at home." Ethan's voice softened. "Was your mom around?" "She left when I was 7. My dad was all I had. And even then, he was gone more than he should have been." She looked at him, eyes damp. "He only became the man I needed when I stopped needing him." Ethan said nothing. He knew that silence, the one filled with all the things you never got to say, the words that arrived too late, if at all. Rachel cleared her throat, pulling herself together. "You think it'll start?" "Not today," Ethan said, "but it'll run, if you let it." Rachel looked at him. "You mean the car or me?" He chuckled, but his gaze was steady. "Both. They worked in tandem for a while. Ethan brought tools from his truck. Rachel handed him wrenches like she never forgot how. Slowly, the garage filled with the kind of quiet that only comes when two people trust each other without saying so. At one point, as Ethan reached across the engine bay, his forearm brushed hers. She didn't move away. Later, they sat on a worn bench against the wall, sipping lukewarm coffee from a thermos Ethan always kept in the cab of his truck. Rachel leaned back, her shoulders relaxed for the first time in days. "You know what I miss most about him?" "What?" "The way he whistled while he worked. Off-key, all the time. It used to drive me crazy, but now the silence feels louder than the sound ever did." Ethan took a long sip before replying. "After my wife passed, I started leaving the TV on in the kitchen. Couldn't stand the stillness." She turned toward him. "Did it help? No. But it kept me company until Lily's laughter was loud enough to fill the house again." Rachel smiled. "She's special. She's tougher than she knows," Ethan said. "She's the only reason I still get up on the bad days." Rachel looked down at her cup. What about the good days Ethan met her eyes? Those are starting to come back. A moment passed, full of everything and nothing. Then Rachel stood and walked to the car again. She opened the passenger door and sat down, folding her hands in her lap. "You know," she said, not looking at him, "he never apologized. Not for the lost years. Not even when he was dying." Ethan leaned on the frame of the car. "Did you need him to?" Rachel considered that. "At first, yes, but now I think I just needed him to see me, the real me, not the version he imagined." "And did he?" She turned her gaze soft. "The night before the funeral, I found a photo in his desk drawer. It was me, covered in grease, 12 years old, holding a wrench like it was a sword. He'd written on the back, 'My fiercest girl.'" Ethan didn't speak. He didn't have to. As the sun dipped low behind the trees outside the garage, Ethan began packing up. Rachel stood nearby, arms wrapped around herself. "You're not just fixing the car, you know," she said. He looked at her puzzled. "You're fixing something in me I didn't even know was broken." Ethan set down his tool bag and walked toward her slowly. He didn't say a word, just reached out and gently brushed her cheek with the back of his hand. "You were never broken," he murmured. "Just tired from carrying too much alone." Rachel closed her eyes. For the first time in a long time, she let someone's kindness sink all the way in. Not because she was ready, but because she no longer wanted to keep it out. That night back home, Lily curled up on the couch beside Ethan, her head resting on his arm. "Did you see the car?" she asked sleepily. He blinked. "What car? In your eyes?" she mumbled. "You looked like you'd been working on something important." He smiled. "I think I was." She yawned. "Was it big? Not really," he whispered. "But it might go further than we think." Outside, the wind carried the scent of spring. New things. Old echoes. And somewhere in a quiet garage, a black Impala waited for its second chance, just like the hearts that once beat behind its wheel. The sky was still streaked with orange when Ethan walked into the kitchen the next morning, rubbing sleep from his eyes and trying not to step on the wooden toy animals Lily had left scattered across the floor. The silence of early morning before coffee, before cartoons, before the world pressed in was one of his favorite parts of the day. But this morning, that silence carried something new. He felt lighter, not like life had become easier. Overnight, there were still bills stacked on the counter and a voicemail from the hospital billing office waiting to be played, but something had shifted. It wasn't about less weight. It was about someone else helping carry it. He put the kettle on and opened the blinds. Outside, a soft rain tapped against the windows. Seattle never stayed dry for long. Lily shuffled into the kitchen blanket, trailing behind her like a cape. "Dad." "Yeah, bug." "Do cars get lonely when no one drives them?" Ethan turned eyebrow raised. "That a dream or one of your deep morning thoughts?" She plopped into a chair. "Just wondering." He smiled as he poured hot water into 2 mugs, his for coffee, hers for cocoa. "I think maybe they do. Just like people." Across the city, Rachel stood at her bathroom mirror applying a soft shade of lipstick she hadn't touched in years. She used to wear it to meetings, to events, to places where she had to smile like she believed in herself more than anyone else in the room. Today, she wasn't wearing it for anyone's approval, just because. She pulled on a navy blue raincoat and stepped into her flats. As she glanced down at her phone, her thumb hovered over a message she'd been drafting since midnight. "Thank you for yesterday. I haven't laughed like that in a long time." She deleted it, typed again. "When you're free, I'd like to finish fixing the car." Deleted again. Instead, she grabbed her keys, slung her bag over her shoulder, and walked out the door. Some things didn't need to be typed. Some things needed to be shown. Ethan had just finished tightening a loose bolt under an office building's maintenance sink when his phone buzzed. A message from a number he hadn't saved but already knew by heart. "Hey, I'm at the garage. Thought the Impala might need a friend today. Coffee's on the bench. You're kind, black, no lies. R." He stared at it for a full 10 seconds before responding. "Be there in 20. When he arrived, Rachel was seated on the old bench again, sipping her coffee and thumbing through a weathered service manual. She looked up as he entered, her expression unreadable. "I figured I'd either see you again or you'd file a restraining order." Ethan grinned, pulling off his jacket. "I'm not really a paperwork guy." She chuckled, then tapped the hood of the car. "It still won't start." "Patience," he said, flipping open his toolbox. "She's like most of us. Stubborn at first, but soft if you give her time." They worked in silence for a while, falling into the rhythm of shared purpose. Rachel held a flashlight steady as Ethan replaced a corroded cable. He adjusted the distributor cap, tapped the side of the alternator, and slid back out from under the hood. "Okay," he said. "Moment of truth." Rachel moved to the driver's seat, hesitated, then turned the key. The engine coughed, sputtered, then roared to life, rough but alive. She stared straight ahead, hands gripping the wheel. Her lips parted, but she didn't speak. Ethan leaned against the door. "You okay?" She nodded, slowly. "I didn't think I'd ever hear that sound again." "Feels like waking up, doesn't it?" Rachel turned off the ignition, then leaned back in the seat, eyes closed. "He used to tell me that everything worth keeping makes noise. Good shoes, old engines, people in love." Ethan looked down, hands in his pockets. "You miss him?" "I do, but I don't miss who we were at the end. I miss who we used to be." A pause. Then she opened her eyes. "He left me something. After he passed. A fund, actually. For restoration work. I'm supposed to use it to bring things back to life. I've been sitting on it for 6 months. I didn't know where to start." "You just did," Ethan said quietly. That night, Ethan found an envelope tucked into his mailbox. No return address. Inside was a note written in tidy cursive for Lily's dreams. "Because someone once fixed mine." Beneath it was a printout of a paid invoice one of the hospitals. A full month's worth marked "paid in full." Ethan sat on the front steps, the paper trembling slightly in his hands. He stared out at the rain-slick street, heart heavy in the best kind of way. He thought of all the things men were taught not to say. "I need help. I'm scared. Thank you for seeing me." He whispered them into the night, not for anyone to hear, but for himself. Then he stood, walked inside, and knelt by Lily's bed. She was fast asleep, breathing softly, her sketchbook clutched to her chest. Ethan kissed her forehead and whispered, "You've got more people in your corner than you know, Bug." And somewhere across town, a woman in a raincoat stood in the window of a quiet penthouse holding a mug of cooling tea, watching the city lights shimmer through the drizzle, feeling for the first time in a long time like the quiet might finally be keeping her company instead of consuming her. Rachel sat in the green room of the local TV studio, fingers curled around a lukewarm glass of water. The place smelled like hairspray and nerves. A production assistant offered her a fresh coat of powder for the 3rd time, but she declined. Her heart was already pounding. No amount of makeup would mask that. She'd been invited for a segment titled "Women Who Lead Local CEOs, Changing the Face of Business." It wasn't her first appearance. These days, she knew how to shape her story into something polished, a woman who rose through the ranks, turned a failing health brand into a national success, and stood at the helm of Langford Nutrition with poise and grace. But this time, the story felt thinner, because part of her no longer wanted to be the woman who had it all together. A stagehand signaled, 5 minutes. Rachel looked at her reflection in the dressing room mirror, and just for a second she didn't recognize herself. The expensive blazer, the poised expression. It felt like armor, and she suddenly hated it. Across town, Ethan stood beneath the hood of a dented Toyota in a community garage where he picked up weekend jobs for extra cash. Sweat gathered at his temples despite the early spring chill. His phone buzzed in his pocket. A notification, Live Now, Como for News. Women Who Lead, CEO Rachel Langford. His fingers hovered over the screen. He hadn't known she was appearing. She hadn't mentioned it the last time they saw each other. He clicked the link. There she was, composed, elegant. The same woman who had stood barefoot in a silk robe and whispered, "I was hoping it was you." But this version of Rachel was different. This version smiled politely at questions about leadership, laughed on cue, and spoke eloquently about market strategy and quarterly vision. Not once did she mention the garage, or the man who'd helped start her father's car, or Lily, or anything real. Ethan turned off the live stream halfway through. It wasn't bitterness, it was something quieter, something that had no name but settled into his chest like dust. After the segment, Rachel returned to her penthouse and kicked off her heels like they offended her. She sat in the dark for a long while, staring at the skyline. Her phone vibrated texts from board members congratulating her. Her PR agent said it was a perfect blend of strength and relatability, but none of it felt true. There was one message she wanted, one from Ethan. It never came. 3 days passed. No texts, no calls. The Impala sat quiet in the garage. The silence between them grew not with anger, but with caution, as if neither wanted to touch something that might break too easily. Then, on a gray Saturday morning, Rachel walked into Langford Tower for a routine logistics meeting. Her assistant, Camille Sharp, warm in her 50s with a heart-like steel-wrapped velvet, followed her into the elevator. "You've been quieter than usual," Camille said, watching Rachel's reflection in the mirrored wall. "I've had a lot on my mind." Camille gave a knowing hum. "Is it about the man from the garage?" Rachel turned. "How do you—" "You smile different now," Camille said simply. "But today, your smile's gone back to the old one, the kind you wear for shareholders." Rachel said nothing. They reached the 28th floor. As the doors opened, Camille placed a hand on Rachel's arm. "Let me say something I should have said a long time ago. When you find someone who sees the unpolished parts of you and doesn't flinch, you don't keep them in the wings." Rachel's breath caught. "You bring them center stage," Camille finished, "or you risk losing them to someone who will." That evening, Ethan stood under the flickering garage light cleaning out his toolbox. The day had been long, 2 call-outs, 1 flat tire, and a surprise invoice from the pharmacy. But none of that was what really had him exhausted. He didn't want to admit how much he'd hoped she'd reach out. Then headlights swept across the driveway. A sleek sedan pulled up. Rachel stepped out dressed not like a CEO but like a woman who had forgotten how to breathe easy until now. Ethan didn't move. She approached slowly, her eyes searching his. "I saw you watching the interview," she said quietly. He nodded once. "I wasn't hiding you," she added. "I just didn't know where to put something real in a world built on performance." That's not what hurt, Ethan said. What hurt was knowing you had a chance to speak your truth and chose the version of yourself that doesn't bleed. Rachel looked down, biting her lip. "I've spent so many years being what people expected. I forgot what it meant to be known." "You let me see you," Ethan said, "and then you tucked that part of you away." She stepped closer, voice trembling. "Because I liked it too much. Because it scared me. You scared me. I'm just a man with a wrench and a daughter who thinks I hung the moon." "And that's exactly why you scare me," she whispered, "because you're not temporary. And I don't know how to do permanent without breaking it." Ethan's eyes softened. "You don't have to do it perfectly, just honestly." Rachel blinked, fighting tears. "Can I still come back from this?" "You're already here." He opened his arms. She stepped into them. And for the first time there was no distance between the woman she showed the world and the one he already loved. That night, Lily drew a picture of 3 people sitting on the hood of a car under a night sky full of stars. She handed it to Ethan without a word. He studied it, heart full. "Is that Rachel?" he asked. Lily nodded. "She's the one in the middle, holding both our hands." And somewhere in the city, in a tower that no longer felt so high, a woman placed a framed drawing on her desk. A girl, a man, and her. Underneath, in careful handwriting, "Some things aren't meant to be hidden." The knock came just after 9. Ethan had barely put Lily to bed, barely turned off the porch light when the soft thud echoed through their small home. He paused in the kitchen towel still in hand dish half-dried. Something about the sound didn't feel ordinary. He opened the door. Rachel stood there drenched. Her hair clung to her face in dark ribbons. Her coat was soaked through her hands, trembling despite being shoved deep in her pockets. But it wasn't the rain that made her look like that. It was something deeper, something raw. Ethan stepped back instinctively, silently inviting her in. She didn't speak until the door closed behind her. "I didn't know where else to go," she whispered. He looked at her closely. Not as the composed woman he'd come to admire, not as the confident CEO, but as someone who looked like she'd been holding her breath for too long. "I'm glad you came," he said. She dropped her purse by the door and leaned against the wall like her legs might give out. "They sent me flowers today. My board congratulated me on the brand recovery segment." Ethan waited. "But that's not why I'm here." Her voice cracked. "I'm here because I made a mess." He frowned. "What happened?" Rachel's eyes met his stormy and wet. "I tried to help, quietly, anonymously. I thought it would take pressure off you, not break something." It hit him then. The hospital invoice, paid in full. He'd known. Deep down, he'd known it was her. But now, hearing it confirmed, it didn't bring gratitude. It brought a weight he hadn't expected. "I wasn't trying to insult you," she said quickly. "I just wanted to give Lily something she deserved, something I could give, without asking for anything back." Ethan looked away, jaw tight. I thought maybe that was kindness." "It was," he said finally. "It is. But Rachel, I've spent the last few years fighting to prove I could stand on my own 2 feet, that I could be the father Lily needs, that I could survive losing Marissa and still build something good from what was left." Rachel nodded slowly. "And now it feels like someone just handed you charity." He didn't answer. He didn't have to. She stepped forward. "That wasn't my intention. I wasn't trying to fix you. I just—" Her voice cracked again. "I just couldn't stand watching someone I care about break quietly while everyone else looked away." Ethan exhaled long and low. "You're not wrong for caring. But kindness isn't always clean, Rachel. Sometimes it bumps into pride, and people bleed before they say thank you." She dropped her gaze. "So, what now?" He walked to the kitchen, poured her a cup of tea, and placed it gently in her hands. "Now, we sit," he said, voice warm but firm. "We sit and we talk, like grown-ups who've both lost too much to lose each other over misunderstanding." They sat at the small table, the silence thick but not suffocating. "I grew up in a world," Rachel began, "where helping meant control. My father, before he changed, he used money like a weapon, guilt disguised as generosity. So I learned to associate help with ownership. And I swore I'd never be like him." Ethan looked at her. Really looked. "You're not." She blinked hard. "But I was afraid you'd see me that way. That if I told you I paid the bill, it would sound like I was buying my way in." His voice softened. "It would have hurt. But not because of who you are, because of what I'm still unlearning about myself." Rachel's shoulders slumped. "Then maybe we're both just trying to get better at being seen." He gave a half smile. "Sounds about right." A creak from the hallway. Then soft footsteps. Lily in her pajamas rubbing her eyes. She froze when she saw Rachel. Rachel stood slowly. "Hi, Lily. I'm sorry if I woke you." Lily shook her head and walked straight to her father, crawling into his lap like it was the safest place on earth. "Did you come because of me?" she asked Rachel, her voice small. Rachel knelt beside the table eye level with her. "No, sweet girl. I came because of me." Lily tilted her head. "Are you okay now?" Rachel smiled, tears threatening. I'm on my way." Ethan brushed Lily's hair back. "What do you say we let Rachel stay for a bit, just until the rain stops?" Lily nodded. "She can have my blanket, the warm one." Rachel looked at Ethan. I don't deserve this. No, he said, but neither did I. And yet, we're still here. Later, after Lily fell back asleep, Rachel stood by the window sipping tea, wrapped in a blanket that smelled faintly of strawberries and childhood. Ethan joined her, his shoulder brushing hers. You could have told me, he said softly. I was afraid it would change something. It did, he replied, but maybe not in the way you think. She turned to him. How then? He met her eyes. It reminded me that love doesn't always show up the way we expect. Sometimes it looks like a paid invoice and a woman at your door in the rain, terrified she ruined everything. Rachel's voice was barely a whisper. And sometimes it looks like a man who forgives you before you even ask. Ethan leaned in, forehead touching hers. And sometimes it looks like this. No kiss. Just quiet. Just two people standing still together. As the rain softened, the world outside disappeared behind fogged glass. But inside, something new had taken root. Not perfection, not certainty, just two souls learning how to stay. The hospital room smelled faintly of antiseptic and lemon-scented cleaner. Ethan sat at Lily's bedside, his hand wrapped around hers as monitors beeped in their steady, indifferent rhythm. The worst had passed. Doctors had said the seizure was brief or vital stable, but it had been enough to shake him to his core. She looked so small in the hospital bed cheeks, pale, tangled curls matted to her forehead. Her stuffed raccoon, the one Marissa had sewn together the night before her first kindergarten day, lay tucked beneath her arm. Ethan hadn't moved from that chair in hours. He hadn't even noticed the door open. Rachel stood silently for a moment before stepping in. She wore no makeup, no suit, just jeans and a soft gray cardigan. She held 2 coffees, and her expression carried the kind of tenderness that can only come from having lived through someone else's pain. I came as soon as I got your message, she said softly. Ethan turned the lines on his face deeper than usual. She collapsed. One moment she was drawing on the porch, and the next, his voice trailed off. He swallowed hard. They say it might have been triggered by fever. She's had mild ones before, but never like this. Rachel set the coffees on the side table and gently knelt beside him. How long have you been here? Since noon yesterday. Have you eaten? He didn't answer. Just looked down at Lily and brushed her hair from her eyes again, as if afraid she'd slip away if he stopped. Rachel placed a hand over his. You're not alone, Ethan. His hand tensed beneath hers. I know that's hard to believe, she added. You've carried so much. Too much. But you don't have to anymore. Not like this. He didn't speak for a long time. The only sound was Lily's breathing and the hushed murmur of nurses outside the door. Then, finally, I never expected to get help that didn't cost me something. Rachel's voice cracked. It doesn't. Not from me. Ethan leaned back, rubbing his eyes. She asked me once, Dad, are you happy? And I said, of course, but I wasn't. Not really. I was surviving. I thought that was enough. But lately, with you, I remembered what it felt like to want more than just getting by. Rachel's breath hitched. Then maybe this is the moment we stop surviving. He looked at her and for the first time in years allowed himself to believe that maybe, just maybe, he didn't have to carry it all alone. Hours passed. Lily stirred. Rachel was the first to notice. She leaned in gently. Hey there, Starshine. Ethan jolted awake, reaching for her hand. Lily blinked slowly. Dad. I'm here, he said, voice thick. Her eyes fluttered toward Rachel. You came. I wouldn't be anywhere else, Rachel whispered. Lily gave a sleepy smile. I dreamed I was flying. Ethan chuckled through his tears. That's because you're stronger than gravity. Later that evening, as the nurses checked Lily's vitals, Ethan and Rachel sat just outside her room. A vending machine hummed nearby. Neither of them touched the paper cups of water they held. Rachel broke the silence. I never told you what happened the day my dad died. Ethan turned to her, gentle but silent. He'd been sick a while, but the last few days he got better. We laughed. We talked about rebuilding the Impala. I thought maybe we had more time. She looked down, eyes brimming. The morning he passed, I was supposed to bring him coffee. It was this silly thing we'd both drink it black, no sugar, no cream, just strong and bitter. He said that's how we'd know we were Langfords. She paused. I stopped for a phone call. A meeting I shouldn't have taken. I was 10 minutes late. When I got there, he was gone. Ethan reached over and took her hand. I've carried that moment with me, Rachel continued, convinced myself that my love wasn't loud enough, that if I'd just hurried. You loved him, Ethan said, interrupting gently. You were there. The time, the coffee, none of that changes what he knew. Rachel's voice dropped. And what do you know about that kind of guilt? He met her eyes. I know that I still hear Marissa's voice when I wake up sometimes, that I spend too much time wondering if I could have done something more, been faster, smarter, better. But guilt isn't love, Rachel. Guilt is fear with a costume. She stared at him, the edges of her pain softening. And love. Love is what shows up at the hospital, what sits quietly in a chair all night, what remembers the names of stuffed animals and packs spare socks, what forgives you even when you forget to forgive yourself. Tears slipped down her cheeks. I'm so tired of pretending, she whispered. Ethan pulled her close. Then don't, he said. Not with me. Later, as they stood in the hallway watching Lily sleep, a nurse approached with a clipboard. You're listed as the emergency contact, she said to Ethan, but there's also a secondary name added recently. Rachel Langford. Ethan turned, stunned. I didn't. Rachel smiled just slightly. I did. You put yourself on the list I didn't want to assume, but I also didn't want to disappear when it mattered most. Ethan swallowed hard. Is that okay? She asked, tentative now. He took her hand. More than okay. In that quiet hallway beneath the fluorescent lights and the smell of too much sanitizer, a truth settled between them. They had become each other's people. No contract, no conditions. Just the steady, stubborn, healing kind of love that stays even in hospital rooms, even in grief, even when neither knew exactly how to begin again. Sunlight poured through the tall garage windows like warm honey. The Impala sat at the center of it all, gleaming proud and fully awake. Weeks of work had led to this, every bolt tightened, every wire replaced, every part polished by hands that knew what it meant to rebuild more than just machinery. Rachel stood beside the open driver's side door, fingers trailing across the leather-wrapped wheel. She wore no gloves today, no blazer. Just a faded flannel shirt that had belonged to her father, still smelling faintly of cedar and motor oil. Ethan stood a few feet away, watching her with quiet admiration. Lily sat on the hood legs, swinging her sketchbook open on her knees as she drew the finished car like it was a living thing, a memory being born in real time. She's beautiful, Rachel said softly, nodding to the car. But her eyes were on Lily. She is, Ethan agreed. His gaze fixed on Rachel now. The car wasn't the only thing that had come back to life. They spent the morning together running errands for the community center's upcoming fundraiser. Rachel had donated a portion of her restoration grant to rebuild the center's dilapidated library. No press, no fanfare, just quiet action. I thought you only restored engines, Ethan teased, loading a box of donated books into the back of his truck. Rachel grinned, brushing a strand of hair behind her ear. Turns out I also restore roofs, carpets, and hope. You're dangerous. She shrugged playfully. You brought this out of me. He didn't argue, because it was true. There was a rhythm between them now. Something unspoken but steady. Like a song only they could hear. That afternoon, Rachel hosted a private dedication ceremony at the community library. A small crowd gathered children, parents, a few volunteers. Camille was there too, dabbing her eyes behind dark sunglasses and pretending it was allergies. Ethan stood near the back arms, folded Lily leaning against his side. Rachel took the small podium, her voice clear but warm. When I was a child, I used to read stories about people who found things hidden rooms, lost cities, letters left in dusty attics. I always wondered what it would feel like to find something that changed everything. She paused. And now I know. Because sometimes what you find isn't buried treasure, it's a second chance. And sometimes it looks like an old car, or a little girl who loves to draw, or a man who shows up without asking for anything but gives you more than you knew you needed. Her voice trembled. She found Ethan's eyes in the crowd. Today, we dedicate this space to second chances, and to the people brave enough to offer them. Applause followed, warm and sincere. But Ethan didn't clap. He just looked at her like he'd never forget what she said, because it wasn't just for the crowd. It was for him. Later that evening, Rachel found herself on Ethan's front porch holding a casserole dish and 2 bottles of root beer. "I hope your standards for dinner are as low as mine," she said, stepping inside. "Lower," he teased. "As long as nothing's expired, we're celebrating." They ate on the back steps, watching Lily chase fireflies across the yard. The sky stretched overhead, peach fading into soft indigo stars pricking through like shy confessions. Ethan leaned back on his elbows. "You ever think about what happens next?" Rachel looked at him. "Every day." And she hesitated, then said, I want to try living in a story where nothing's missing, where no one's pretending. Just a good life, even if it's quiet." Ethan nodded slowly. "That sounds like a story worth writing." She smiled. "Would you want to write it with me?" He turned to her fully, then one hand reaching to brush her cheek. "I already am." Their lips met, not in urgency, but in deep, quiet recognition. The kind of kiss that said, "You found me and I'm staying." Inside, Lily was curled up on the couch with a blanket and her sketchbook. When Rachel came in, Lily looked up and asked, "Are you going to be here in the morning?" Rachel smiled. "If your dad's okay with it." Lily looked at Ethan. "She's part of the house now." Ethan crouched beside his daughter, kissing her forehead. Then it settled. Lily beamed. "I'll draw a picture of all of us. Even the car." Rachel chuckled. "Especially the car." That night, Rachel sat in the armchair by the front window, Ethan across from her with a mug of tea. The room was quiet, but it wasn't empty. It was full of all the things they hadn't known how to hope for. A knock came at the door, just one. Camille peeked her head in. "Just came by to drop off your keys, darling. Didn't want to interrupt your domestic tranquility." Rachel blushed. "Come in." Camille stepped inside, handed her the keys, and looked around the space. Then she leaned close, kissed Rachel's cheek, and whispered, "Welcome home." Rachel didn't need to answer. She already knew. This was it. Not the penthouse, not the office, not even the garage. Here, with them. This was home. Outside, the streetlight flickered gently in the distance. Fireflies blinked in slow, graceful rhythm. And behind one warm window, 2 people sat across from each other with the kind of stillness that only comes after the storm has passed. There were no more wrong doors, only the one they had chosen together. The sun rose gently over Seattle, casting a golden haze over the rooftops and tree-lined streets. In the early quiet, before traffic began to hum and city life stirred, Ethan stood by the front porch with a cup of coffee in hand, watching the light spill across the yard like a slow exhale. Inside, Rachel stirred eggs in a pan barefoot and humming something soft, an old tune her father used to whistle, though she only remembered fragments. Lily sat at the table, feet swinging sketchbook already open. Her latest drawing featured the Impala parked beside a little house with warm windows and 3 stick figures inside. One held a wrench. One had a braid. The smallest held a stuffed raccoon, high like a victory flag. The caption at the top of the page, scribbled in colored pencil, read, "We fixed everything." Rachel caught a glimpse of it as she plated breakfast. Her throat tightened, but not with sadness. With gratitude. Later that morning, Ethan pulled a worn cardboard box from the hallway closet. Dust motes danced in the air as he set it down on the living room rug. Rachel raised an eyebrow. "What's this?" "Pieces," he said. "Of the man I was before everything changed." He opened the box. Inside were photographs, some faded, some curled at the corners. Lily as a baby in Marissa's arms. Ethan in a hospital chair holding his daughter like she might vanish if he blinked. Drawings Lily made during her first year of preschool. And buried near the bottom, a letter in an envelope worn soft from being carried too long. He handed it to Rachel. "I wrote this 6 months after Marissa died," he said. "I never sent it. Didn't know who it was for. Maybe me. Maybe someone I hadn't met yet." Rachel opened it slowly. The handwriting was uneven, raw. "If you're reading this, then I've survived another day. That's something. Some days I can't tell if surviving is a victory or a punishment. But Lily laughs now, and that sound is a kind of salvation I never saw coming. If someone finds this, I hope they understand. I tried, not perfectly, but honestly. I tried to be kind, even when I didn't know what to do with my own pain." Rachel's eyes blurred with tears. She folded the letter and placed it back in the box with care. "You were always writing the story that led us here," she whispered. Ethan nodded. "And you were the chapter I didn't know I needed." That afternoon, Rachel brought Ethan and Lily to the Langford Foundation's new community event, a quiet launch for a grant she'd created in her father's name. It would fund scholarships for children of single parents pursuing trade careers, mechanics, carpenters, electricians, people who fixed things, people like Ethan. The crowd was small neighbors, students, volunteers. Nothing grand, just real. The way her father might have wanted it once upon a time. Rachel stood beside the plaque as it was unveiled. Beneath her father's name was a single engraved line. "Sometimes the person who fixes things deserves to be fixed too." Ethan didn't speak. He didn't have to. His hand in hers said everything. That night after dinner they gathered on the couch as rain pattered gently against the windows. Lily curled between them half asleep, the television humming something soft and slow. Rachel turned to Ethan. "You know what I keep thinking about?" He looked at her eyes, gentle. "What?" "The first night we met. That moment when I opened the door and said, 'I was hoping it was you.'" He chuckled. "I thought you had me confused with someone else. I did, or maybe I didn't. Maybe some part of me was always hoping you'd find your way there." He pulled her closer, voice warm against her hair. "And maybe I was always meant to walk through the wrong door." They fell quiet, then watching Lily drift off to sleep with her arms around her sketchbook as if guarding her own little universe. The next morning, Rachel woke early. She stood at the window watching the city stretch and breathe. Ethan stirred behind her, then rose and wrapped his arms around her waist, chin resting on her shoulder. "You okay?" he murmured. She nodded. "I'm not afraid of quiet anymore." He pressed a kiss to her temple. "That's because this quiet is full." She turned to face him, fingers laced behind his neck. "We didn't get here the easy way." "No," he agreed, "but we got here the right way." She smiled. "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if you hadn't knocked on my door all the time? And I always come back to the same thing." "What's that?" He kissed her forehead. "Not all wrong. Doors are wrong. Somewhere outside, a car engine rumbled gently to life. Somewhere inside, a child dreamed of stars. And somewhere between the two, a love that had been lost, found, and built piece by piece sat quietly holding every room it entered a little more gently. The wrong door, the right place, the beginning after all. We'd love to hear from you. Where in the world are you watching from? Your comments always bring this channel to life, and we truly enjoy reading each and every one. If this story touched your heart, please consider subscribing so you don't miss the next one. Every subscription helps us continue sharing meaningful healing stories like this one. Thank you so much for watching. We're grateful you're here. Until next time, take care and stay kind.